So Paul, you are going to interview Andrew Boyd, who is one of the arborists in our city. He's a very hardworking arborist these days. I think Paul's going to ask some questions about urban trees of Andrew. But if you have questions for Andrew as well, feel free to put them in the chat. And so that, I'm not sure if Paul, you can read and talk at the same time, but if Carolyn, if you don't mind keeping an eye on the chat, and if you see a really good question that fits in with the flow, then shout it out to Paul. And if Paul, you could keep it to 9 minutes, that'll give me a couple minutes at the end to close up.
Okay. Thank you, Rosalind, and hello, Andrew. We haven't rehearsed this at all, so all these questions are going to be like totally cold on Andrew, and so I'll we'll see. You're still muted, Andrew.
How's that?
There, now we can hear you. Good morning.
Morning.
So I know I'll just start. I spoke about in my little section of the threats that are always there in our neighborhoods to trees, and I just mentioned a series of them, and I thought, just from your experience, Andrew, what do you see as the sort of the hierarchy of threats here to trees in our neighborhoods?
Well, certainly in the built environment, we have the obvious things of road salt. Yeah, I'd say road salt is probably the biggest thing I see, and damage, just because it damages above and below ground in terms of salt spray and then salt getting into water, of course. So that's the most pervasive issue in terms of establishment and getting trees to grow. But most things people know of. Emerald ash borer has wreaked havoc, of course, on so many neighborhoods, and before that, Dutch elm disease, Asian longhorn beetles on its way. So from an abiotic point of view, road salt, and a biotic point of view, it's insects and diseases, but mainly I'd say insects.
In terms of preserving mature trees, because I think mature trees have a very particular value. I mean, they've got decades and decades of value having been kind of stored in them, and they're providing these benefits to us. What's your current perspective on the preservation of the mature trees and how well we're doing around that?
Well, in the context of infill, which Rosalind and I work on so frequently, it's available space. It comes down to so often we're taking one house out and the yard with it and putting in, for instance, semi-detached homes, and there's only so much room to go around. So roots or root loss in regards to infill is sort of a daily task of mine. That is the most problematic issue, and why so many urban trees are lost in the face of development. It's really mainly a below ground issue. There's only so much space to go around, and as we densify, which, as we heard earlier, there's many good reasons we should, the pressure on trees is below ground. There's only so much room to go around.
So so that the method that we densify, like, are there ways though to build, or in your practice, have you seen ways that could be adapted to preserve as much root space as possible?
Well, there's lots of ways. They conflict most often and not with the whole theme of density. You know, a footprint of the existing house versus the proposed is usually a lot larger for the proposed, obviously. So below ground, and in the context of what you were saying, Paul, in terms of mature trees, maybe what I should have emphasized more in my last response is that you have existing roots below ground, and of course they need to be removed to account for the larger foundation that's coming in. So why we lose mature trees is because the amount of root loss as a result of that. But in terms of making available space for a future tree, a tree that's planted and then can grow into the new landscape. There's lots of different ways. We've probably, some people on this forum today will have heard about civil cells or below ground structures that will take the weight of a sidewalk but allow roots to go underneath them, which roots typically won't under a traditional sidewalk with a compacted subbase as an example. So things like that, structural soil. There's different products out there that allows trees to coexist in some cases, in many cases, with new development. The problem often is the cost. It's costly. Civil cells are costly. Permeable pavement, as an example, compared to traditional asphalt, is expensive. So more often than not, they're excluded from the development idea just because of the increase in cost.
So a lot of our trees are so-called street trees. They're on, in the front of the property. A lot of them, I guess, are city trees as well. Is it the same? Do we have the same kind of issues around city trees versus privately owned trees, or can you just comment on that distinction?
Yeah, that's a good point. So city trees obviously are within the city right away. As a result, they're not as close to that development scenario I was mentioning earlier in terms of foundations and so on because of setbacks. What often happens with city trees is as an example, driveways. Driveways and expanded, or if it's a new build, a new driveway is coming in. And of course that needs to encounter the road. And sometimes there's a city tree smack dab in the way. So it's not so much a direct correlation or a direct conflict with foundations in city trees. It's more infrastructure, for instance, servicing. You need to now service that house. So a service trench needs to come in, and of course that needs to encounter the road as well. And there could be a tree in the way or a tree close by where, as I mentioned earlier, in the example of a mature tree, it may not be smack dab in the way, but close enough that the amount of root loss means the loss of the tree. So it's not direct conflicts again with the footprint of the proposed new house. It's attaching that house to city services, i.e. the road, where the conflicts occur with city-owned trees.
Right, good. And I don't know how we're doing for time here, 1 minute? Okay, 1 minute. Just a final thought on we talked about losing trees, but what about new trees? What about growing trees, plantings, and species, and comments around that?
When you're thinking of planting trees and with the view to development, tap-rooted species are a lot easier to work around. So this is oaks, the juglin family of walnuts, because they have a deep rooting tendency. There's less conflict with all those things I mentioned earlier because lateral roots, at least in the younger stages, the earlier stages of the tree's life, there's less lateral roots and therefore less potential for conflict. In terms of tree planting, think into the future as well. Asian longhorn beetle as an example, the next pest on the horizon for Ottawa. Deeply furrowed bark. They seem to not like trees with deeply furrowed bark. So as an example, bur oak at a young age has a shaggy kind of bark. Hackberry, another one. So things like that. When you're planting, think, as they say, think 20 years, 30 years down the road, and the potential issues for that tree. As an example, things that aren't an issue, Asian longhorn beetle, but will become an issue. If you're 20 years ahead of the game, you get to keep your tree.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Very, very informative. Thanks.
You're welcome.